When I was talking last night about this use of the term centre with in relation to a kind of feeling of a core self, then again the word core is related to that. There was another kind of metaphor which was lying in the background of what I was saying, which I want to just spend some time ruminating on right now. I'll just revise what I was saying, just for my own purposes, really. What I was getting at within that is that within quite a lot of the theories that I'm reading right now to do with an embodied understanding of what constitutes the self, there's this idea that that this sense of stability that we have, this sense that we are a persistent identity moving through the world, and whilst everything else is changing, there is some part of ourselves, some core self, which maintains its integrity throughout until the point of death, presumably. The idea is that that is generated, that sense is generated by activation patterns arising from stable bodily activities. So metabolic processes, biochemical processes, perhaps processes to do with the orientation of the body in space, something like that. It's a constant backbeat of information being sent to the brain, creates an activation pattern which is stable and which provides a kind of metaphorical anchor to which we can attach a consistent identity over time. Okay, so that's what I was talking about with that. And what I was saying with that last night is that when we talk about that, we talk about it in terms of a kind of center-periphery model. We're kind of mapping that understanding into a spatial, within a spatial metaphor of center and periphery, where we locate these stable and persistent points, this stable and persistent activation pattern, as I'm calling it, as being central, and these more variable, more changing aspects as being outside of that center, more peripheral. Okay, so the thing that crossed my mind last night in relation to that is that we have another metaphor as well for talking about this stable pattern in addition to the center, and that is to do with the ground. And I just want to try and exercise some ideas around that for myself. I think when we use terms like ground, like when we say that we are going to ground ourselves, or we feel really grounded, or we feel that certain parts of ourselves are foundational, or certain ideas are foundational, or we might talk about our fundamental self, or something like that, or kind of related ones to do with roots, or to do with that kind of thing. We're drawing on not a central metaphor. We're drawing on a metaphor of ground, of course, of living at the bottom of a gravity well with our feet attached to an apparently solid surface, and our bodies kind of elevated to varying extents above that level surface. So I'm just thinking what the implications are of that. When I was talking about it in terms of centre, I was providing a kind of phenomenological account, or suggested phenomenological account, of why centre might attach itself as a kind of metaphorical map, or might feel like an appropriate metaphorical map for this persistence, drawn from the idea that we feel ourselves experientially to be at the centre of our experience. As I look around, the world moves around my central axis of my being, so to speak. And I think a similar or a related thing is played out in the ground metaphor, although it adds things as well, which perhaps I'll come on to. Certainly, one of the most stable experiences one can have is the experience that I'm having right now. At all times, there is this pull moving through my body. It feels like it's moving through my body, it's not really. There's a kind of pull which is keeping me on the ground. I've got my feet firmly on the ground. It's kind of a cliche for stability. because it's always there. It's always it's a persistent feature of our being. This ground that that our balance systems and our proprioceptive systems are constantly aligning themselves to. This horizontal surface at 90 degrees to the force of gravity is always there as a constant reminder, constant feature of our phenomenological being. And here I'm reminded of that story. I think it's probably Thomas Metzinger, who told this story as well, about athletes. Not athletes, I think about something completely different. About astronauts. I think it was him who was saying this. But he was saying that sometimes astronauts get the feeling, whilst they're floating weightless, that they feel disembodied or they feel dissociated, that their phenomenal sense of being kind of separates from their experience of who they regard themselves to be in terms of the sort of cultural and personality accretions that form around that. That they feel, as I say, dissociated. And he said I don't know if it's true or not, but this is what he said. He said what they do to try to cure that is that they bang their heels hard against the surface. And apparently banging their heels hard against the surface immediately locks that phenomenal centre, which, as I say, is probably derived from this activation pattern from the body. It immediately locks that centre, that activation pattern, to this. It just feels like it's bringing everything back into alignment. What I'm proposing there is that what it's bringing into alignment is the activation pattern of the I'm alive activation pattern, if you like, from the I'm alive and I'm standing on a flat surface. Just the impact on our heels, which is so routine and which is happening all the time whilst I'm walking, may be enough just to remind, to start that set of neurons firing again, and a kind of wire together, fire together way, fire together, wire together way, I should say. Okay, so in addition to centre as a common feature of embodied experience, providing a stable metaphor for this activation pattern, being a ground-based mammal is also living at the bottom of a gravity well, also provides a highly stable set of completely embodied metaphors for stability, continuity, persistence. Just some of the suggestions that kind of fall out of that, I guess. And here I'm really speculating beyond the data. But one of the things I was thinking about yesterday in relation to centre was that, why does some kind of traditions and ideas and vernacular thought consider the self, the central self in that regard, as a kind of source, as well as a kind of location point or an anchor or an axis. Some traditions consider it as a kind of source, and we all think of it, and I think it's in our routine thinking as well. We tend to think of our impulses and our desires and those kind of things as emerging from deep within the centre of our thought and our sense of being. So there's this sense that there's a kind of generative quality to that point. And perhaps one of the ways in which we can think about that is not so much in terms of centre, but in terms of ground. Because ground is very much associated with generative and impulsive, active, energetic principles, not only because of all the stuff that springs out of it, like all these trees and blades of grass and bushes that I'm walking amongst, but the kind of moment-to-moment impulsive thrust that we as living beings constantly make against that. All the time I'm walking, I'm also falling over and correcting that fall and pushing myself upwards against the thrust of gravity. So there's something very generative and energetic about that resistance and about that. It's just contained within the metaphor. I don't really know how that relates to centre. Maybe there's some kind of leakage across those metaphors, across the schemas for our understanding there. Because these metaphors never exist in singularity. They always kind of they're always in multiple operations. So it may be that there's some bleeding across from one form of understanding of what it is to be a self to another. So the sense that we have of a self being a stable centre is also coloured with the sense of a self being a stable ground. So not only is it the still centre of the turning world, it's the generative base for the upward pulse of lived experience, I guess. Something like that.